Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. Truth from the Stand, Deer Hunting Podcast, here to help you through another hump day. Bringing the DIY report today. I know in the past we've covered everything from, the different habitat updates you should be making, by season with Jeff Sturgis. And we talked to the bow hunting fiend recently about some archery tips and technique to kind of help, hopefully raise your game up a little bit in terms of your shooting accuracy and consistency. And today we're going to shift gears a little bit and do something a little bit different. I know for me, especially when it hits this time of year and I start thinking about doing food plot work and stuff like that, I know I do a little bit of that, whether it's at my in-laws' place or on my dad's property and stuff. But there's nothing quite like, I don't think, owning your own piece of property. And I certainly daydream about that. And so I thought, one of those things where it seems like it's a daunting task. It seems like it might be a little bit out of reach for many of us. But it's really not. And so what I did was I reached out to a buddy of mine, Ben Harshine, who works with Whitetail Properties. And we started talking about, some options, a process to help people kind of get to a place where they could possibly afford a piece of recreational land. So that's what this next DIY report mini-series is going to cover. It's 3 parts. And Ben will be on to kind of walk us through all the different facets of buying your first property. Everything from selecting your agent to putting boots on the ground to, looking at access, to thinking about it from an investment perspective, not just, the land itself, but is there cash opportunity on that property from the moment that you buy it that can offset your outlay of cash to purchase the property. So there's a lot of great information that Ben shares. We'll do it over the course of 3 parts. And this first one, we're really going to kind of focus on the upfront of that. And it's going to be really about finding and setting the stage and setting your goals for evaluating properties and finding your agent. But before we jump into all that, I do want to make mention of a couple things real quick. And I'm going to read some of this only because I want to make sure I get the information right. So be on the lookout on June 11th. It'll run June 11th through July 13th is the Big Wicked Summer Sweepstakes. And you might be asking, what the hell is the Big Wicked Summer Sweepstakes? Well, that is in fact a grand prize of a winner take all, winner take home, a free whitetail hunt with Whitetail Heaven. And that'll be the hunter's choice, whether that's Kentucky, Ohio, or Indiana. You also win a Wicked Pole Saw, handsaw, a Lone Wolf tree stand, hunter safety system harness, a Glacier cooler, and 2 acres of Tecomate seed. That is some package. So all you need to do to get involved to possibly win this, it's really simple, especially with Father's Day coming up here. All you need to do is go to either the Wicked Tree Gear store or wickedtreegear.com, glaciercoolers.com, or tecomate.com and make a purchase of either Wicked, Glacier, or Tecomate products on their website. Every order that you make will basically put you in your name in the hat each time you make a purchase on the website. You can of course use the promo code TRUTH and save yourself some money on any one of those sites with any one of those products. Every time you make a purchase, you'll go into the running to possibly win this great prize. I'll, of course, add some links to this in this blog post show notes, and I'll be posting this on social media too, so you can be on the lookout for that. And just as a reminder, this begins June 11th, and the sweepstake ends on July 13th. So be sure to get involved with this. Also want to make a quick reminder that Velvet Fest, Exodus Outdoor Gear, is still running the Velvet Fest sweepstakes and giveaway, where all you need to be doing is tagging any of your photos from now until I believe it runs about 8 to 10 weeks, and tag any photos on Instagram and Facebook with hashtag VelvetFest, and that will put you in the weekly running. And they're giving away some great prizes, thousands of dollars of prizes, each week, adding up and culminating in a grand prize giveaway at week 10. So be sure to be tagging your images with hashtag VelvetFest to get involved in that. And with that, I think we won't delay any longer. We'll go ahead and get Ben Harshine on the line, and we're going to talk a little whitetail properties and buying your first hunting property. All right, we are back. You're listening to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast installment of the DIY Report. Today, we are talking with Ben Harshine of Huntera Maps and more recently of Whitetail Properties. What's going on, Ben?
Hey, Clint, how are you, man? Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, you bet, man. It's been a little while since we had a chance to talk. We haven't licked our wounds together of the Penguins loss and the Steelers demise of their season. So
Ah, yeah. The Penguins, being in Iowa, I feel like I'm probably one of the only Penguins fans here. But man, we just couldn't make it happen. But I mean, then again, there's to win 3 Stanley Cups in a row. That's literally impossible. So,
right.
Hey, it's all good. Selfishly, I don't want to see the Caps win, but I would like to see Ovechkin raise the cup. So I've been following them hard here.
Yeah, I've been following along a little bit. I'm torn because I'm kind of the same way. It's like I wouldn't mind seeing that guy raise the cup, but I'd also kind of like to see Fleury. You know, we got one of the good guys in goal. You know, so it makes it a little bit easier to stomach, I guess you could say. But thanks for joining.
I lived in DC.
That's right.
Yeah, no, I lived in DC for a good little while here, so I do have a little bit of rivalry that I've brought out here to Iowa.
Nice. Nice. I like it. So thanks for joining, man. For those out there listening that haven't tuned into a DIY report before, you know, what we like to do here, this is a little different than our longer form podcast that you've grown accustomed to. This, you know, our longer form ones are usually an hour to an hour and a half. These ones usually are about 20 minutes-ish in length. And what we really try to do is take some ideas or concepts that might be larger concepts and break them into more digestible, manageable pieces that where hopefully, you know, selfishly myself too, can kind of learn these simpler ideas that I can kind of build upon over time. And that's kind of the goal. And we've done a couple with habitat and management and bow tuning. And I was selfishly kind of riding on the train, commuting into work to Philadelphia the one day. And I started, you know, daydreaming, as many of us do, about owning a piece of property, a piece of hunting property. And when I started thinking about it, I was like, you know, I recently had bought a house. And so there's a lot of steps that kind of go into buying a property or a house. And so it was one of those things where I was like, you know what, I would really like to kind of better understand how to take this approach to get a piece of recreational property possibly. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there listening that probably daydream about the same types of things. And I just so happened to be fortunate enough to have a buddy who works in that line of work. And so Ben Harshine's name popped into my head to talk about, you know, going about buying a hunting property. And that's what we're going to do today is we're going to start to break this down into digestible pieces. And this is really section 1. So we'll just kind of dive right into it, man. I know whenever I started looking for houses, you know, it can be a really, as I'd mentioned, a daunting task. You kind of don't know where to start. And I think the smartest thing that we did, you know, at least in that regard, was we found our real estate agent first, because the first house we had bought, we really kind of started going it alone very early on. And we got, I guess, a little bit overwhelmed with the process. So I guess, could you talk to me a little bit about, you know, how to go about finding a real estate agent and what you should look for in that person who's going to kind of help guide you toward the right property?
Absolutely. The most important part of this entire process is finding the right agent that is going to be literally your partner in one of the biggest decisions, at least financial decisions in your life. So you certainly, if you're wanting to buy ground specifically, in this podcast about hunting ground or a combination of hunting / income producing land, you want to start off by finding somebody in the area that is an expert in the area that you want to buy in. And when I say expert, I'm talking about a land specialist, somebody that does this full time, lives and breathes in the form of acres, specifically recreational ground or crop ground or ground that you want to be able to take your kids on or put a camp on. That's the person you want to find, is somebody that's in that market every day that can navigate, at least on the buying side, especially navigate what is a good purchase and what is listings that are priced out of the market. So you want to find that person that you're comfortable with. I would encourage you to interview multiple. I'd like to think that we've got agents all over the country that you know are in that territory that you're wanting to buy in. But the number one, the very first step is for you and whoever is invested in this purchase with you, whether it be a partner or spouse or whatnot. You want to meet that person and get to know them and interview them. You know, you want to be comfortable and establish trust, you know, because it's it's a big decision in your life. So, we don't take that lightly, but yeah, number one is finding somebody you're comfortable working with.
Right. And I think it's important, you mentioned trust, that's the big key, that's that person has your best interest in mind. And, I know that there were several times that we walked away from a property on the recommendation of our real estate agent, even though we were interested. They saw something that we didn't, and we're trying to lead us in the right place. And like, you need to have that trust. You can kind of give yourself in that process to that expert, So
yeah, absolutely. There's going to be things that you flat out don't know, and you're going to rely on us to help guide you on whether that's a sound decision for your circumstance or not. And it's our job, it's our duty to take the high road, no matter the grade. Your interest is the number one interest in hand here, not our commission or anything like that. So, yeah, you've got it. That's step one, is finding the right person.
Nice. I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned land specialists, and that might be something that maybe people are less familiar with when they're talking about buying property, because it might be more specific to recreational property. So can you, I guess, give me just like the Cliff Notes version on, what a land specialist is and what that entails?
Yeah, so a land specialist is that we specialize in land, at least in the real estate side. We are understanding all things that have to do with primarily rural ground. I mean, there can be land specialists that specialize in commercial development land as well. But what I'm talking about is somebody that lives and breathes the timber, the cropland, the scenic valleys, the countryside, and really has a strong grasp on not only what the local market is, what the price per acre is, different forms of return on investment, how that property can, we'll get into this, but how that property can bring income back to you and help offset your mortgage, being able to take you on a piece of ground and show you the pros and cons, the unbiased pros and cons of those properties that you're visiting. Somebody that can really paint a picture of what this land will give back to you, whether it's a sound investment or not. Somebody that's not scared to go out and preview properties on your behalf and walk through the briars and the brush and the humidity of the middle of the summer on some of these swampy river bottoms and whatnot, and get in the thick of it, really dial into to understanding each piece of ground that they're either buying or selling. That's what a land specialist does.
Right, and I think that's important to kind of note, right? Because I think when people consider buying, property in general, if they've not bought land specifically before, or recreational land, hunting land, farmland, whatever the case might be, we're not talking about your typical, guy or gal who's working for Century 21. There's a time and a place for them, but what we're talking about specifically, you need someone who knows this area and has a deep expertise in this specific kind of area of real estate. I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say is when you find the right person, that they're gonna be able to articulate soil, soil values. We got, like here in the Midwest, we've got CSR2 values, corn suitability rating, which is essentially a quantifiable number, a way to quantify how good or how fertile a piece of dirt is. So you've got anywhere from CSR 30, which is pretty rough stuff. It's probably highly erodible. Maybe it's old pasture that's compacted. It's just got sandy soils, all the way to CSR 90, which is some of the best dirt on the planet that can really bring the high yields of our grain. And having somebody be able to articulate those types of numbers, or in the South, you've got pine plantations that have a specific management plan that it needs to be managed a certain way, and that'll bring a certain income in a certain amount of years. I guess I'm getting a little bit off topic, but yeah, the land specialists eat, sleep, and breathe all things land.
Right. I think it's important to kind of mention those things because, people out there listening that want to buy a piece of recreational property, it's like they may not consider running a farm, right? And we'll get to this later in this in this DIY report. But the other important piece is how much value can the property bring back to you in terms of an investment. And so how much of that land is tillable possibly that you could lease to a farmer who's going to plant crops on it to bring money back to you. So those things I think are important for people to understand, that it's not, there's a lot that can go into it, not to scare anybody off, but if you want to make a sound investment, if you find to this first point, if you find the right land specialist, the right agent to work with, you'll have your bases covered in that regard. I guess the next big thing, man, is I think this is the part where a lot of people get a little nervous, I think, is, when you start to think about the cost of a property. For me, my wife and I are kind of nerdy with these types of things, and we have Excel spreadsheets with our with our income and our revenue, our income and output, right? And we kind of understood when we were starting to look at houses and so forth that we kind of knew what our budget was. We knew what we could spend. But for anyone out there that might be less familiar with that, how do you recommend if someone comes to you and says, "Hey Ben, I'm looking to buy a piece of recreational property, and I want to kind of understand how I should set my budget." Where do you kind of start with them?
Mm-hmm. Well, everybody's financial situation is certainly different, and what I would say is to start with is just what you did. Get with your spouse, get with your partner, maybe it's just yourself, and list the best way to do it is with your monthly income and your monthly output. That's how a lot of, at least America, works here, in the form of salaries and bills and whatnot, right. And determine, okay, this is the chunk of money that that I'm able to set aside for an investment, just like you would with a car. I mean,
right.
Everybody listening to this podcast most likely drives, and at one point or another, you determined you're going to buy a vehicle. Did you buy were you able to afford a $6,000 car, or were you able to afford that Mercedes or whatnot? So try to dial into what you can afford from a basic standpoint on a month-to-month basis, and then the next step would be to go speak with a lender. Say, pop into a couple different banks, meet with these lenders, interview them like you would just interview a land specialist, and every bank is a little bit different. I really like these local banks because they're super tied into the local land market, and they're not as timid. They're a lot more savvy with being able to loan on especially recreational land as opposed to the larger banks. I'm not saying don't go to the larger banks to do this, but don't be afraid to talk to your local small banks and credit unions and say, tell them your story, that you'd like to buy, you're interested in shopping around for some ground, and try to have an understanding of what you're looking for, to be, I guess, black and white. Let's say that I want to go in and buy a piece of nasty old overgrown cattle pasture that's not bringing any more income. I'm not putting cows on it anytime soon. It's going to be awesome hunting. There's no good trees to be able to take off of. We're never going to plant on it. It's a zero income piece of ground. Okay. That versus, say, a 50-50 farm where you've got, some pretty good hardwood ridges, but you got a good bit of crop ground there too. Or maybe there's a CRP payment on that. And I can explain that stuff later, but the form of, if that property is bringing income, then that lender is going to need to know, okay, this is kind of what we're looking at. That way they'll be able to help you determine, run your credit scores and do all of that, look into your financials, and be able to help you determine what you can afford and what you would be approved for, aside from what you think you could afford, what you actually are approved for. So
right.
That's really going to be a critical part of all of this, is before you really start ripping around the countryside with one of us, you go into the bank and really understand what your down payments are going to look like. I mean, typically on recreational ground, what I'm seeing, at least out here, is, and I'm not speaking for all banks across the country, but typically I'm seeing 20% is a pretty common form of down payment. So if you're going to buy a $100,000 property, then you're going to need to put $20,000 cash down on that note before, on closing day.
Right.
Now, understanding principal and understanding interest, the basic, the foundation of a loan. Principal is really what you're borrowing, but then there's always going to be interest on that typically.
Right.
And that interest rate is going to vary with a lot of factors, but you can shop around interest rates with different banks. And that interest rate is essentially the cost for, what that bank charges you for using their money to purchase that property. So the bank is finding a good lender and one that you got a relationship with, or establishing a new relationship with, is a critical part of all this.
Right. I mean, for the bank, it's they're looking at, what's the risk associated with the person that you're lending to, with the property itself. When you mentioned it's not income delivering, and it's going to just be something someone wants to go hunt. I'm sure they probably look at the value of the property differently based on what's possible with the property. I'm curious, with interest rate, do you find that I'm just curious because there may not be a difference, but is there a difference between the interest rate you would get for a recreational property versus just buying or getting a mortgage for a home?
That's a good question. Yeah, I haven't seen a huge swing, honestly. But again, it's going to come back to whether you got long-term relationship, what your credit score is like. I'm certainly not an expert whenever it comes to the loaning side of this world, but I did want to before we jump off this topic, Clint, I wanted to talk a little bit about the original question you had here in this segment. Had to do with what you can afford.
Yeah.
And it's important to know when you go on whitetailproperties.com or any Landwatch or Lands of America or wherever you're Craigslist, anywhere you see a listing for what the price is for a specific tract of ground, remember that most of the time, there's going to be some negotiation in there, and that's not always going to be, more times than not, that's not going to be the price it's going to take to buy that piece of ground. Everybody's pricing strategy is different and whatnot, but that's one thing to consider. And another thing to consider is, okay, well, wow, I see typically, and this is just an example, typically I see hunting ground in southern Iowa go for, $2,500 an acre. And this property up here is $3,500 an acre. Well, that you got to consider the income that property is going to be bringing in for you on a yearly basis as well. And right. In the form of cash rent or CRP, you want to dive into, and the good listings will have the details of the fine financial details of that property, especially what the cash rent is or what the CRP payments are. You could be getting a significant check every year in the form of that, which you could apply then towards your monthly payments. So, we could go deep into examples, but there's a lot of times land can help put money back in your pocket is what I'm trying to get at. And understanding what that composition of ground looks like is really valuable to be able to determine what you can afford.
Right. It's not a static thing, right? I guess might be one way to say it. It's like that number that you see is the starting point. The real number kind of lies in the details, whether it's the negotiation to come down on the price or whether it's what that property can provide back, is to able to offset the total cost of the property. I think that's important because I think people see a price and they think that that's just out of their pocket entirely. That's just what the cost is versus all the nuance. And there's a lot of nuance because, you've mentioned a couple of times, the word investment. And I think that that's an important thing to remember, that if you're approaching this a certain way, any piece of land that you purchase is an investment, but if you look at it a certain way, it could even be more so an investment that starts to pay dividends back to you. The one thing I wanted to kind of hit on, man, it was, do you have any tricks, I guess, or tips, and maybe we should call them, for saving for a hunting property? You see that price tag, whatever it is per acre, and you're going to buy 100 acres and it's going to cost you $250,000 or whatever the case might be. Do you have any kind of tips that you like to share with folks when they first just kind of start dipping their toe in it and they're really starting to consider looking for a piece of recreational ground or a piece of farmland or whatever the case might be? How do you suggest people kind of start that ball rolling to build that nest egg?
You got to really be honest with yourself and look at what you're spending your money on and what your income is, but what you're spending your money on, and out of that, we all, I'm just as guilty, hey, man, it's getting late for dinner. Let's just go out and get something to eat,
right. Yeah.
So being able to assess some of those parts in life that you're spending your money on, that you could live without, let's take that and actually jam it into a savings account in the form of a direct deposit every month. Or, that's, maybe you've got, maybe you make $3,000 a month and you're dedicating $1,500 to your monthly bills and $500 to your kids' school, education or whatnot, or childcare, and you've got an extra $1,000, and that's kind of, maybe that goes towards a vacation or what. What I'm trying to say is pick some of those things that you can live without. Maybe it's ditching the Netflix monthly subscription, which is, people are probably laughing because that'd be pretty hard. There's a lot of good content on Netflix,
right.
but what what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You gotta. If you really want it, you'll find a way. Humans are tough, and doing everything you can to really live maybe a little more simplified life for a little while.
Yeah.
Or take it the other way. You can only save so much, but why not try to go find other ways where you can make make a couple more bucks on the side and get a second job or go and work some overtime, and you'll do that for a handful of years. Next thing you know, bam, you got your down payment for a piece of ground that you think that you would never be able to get. And keep your eye on the market, and I don't want to get too far down a rabbit hole, but there's ways that you can put more money in. Honestly, I think a really big step is if you have direct deposit, literally change that direct deposit into a new account that you're not going to touch.
Yeah.
And that's the easiest way to get some funds rolling in the right direction.
Yeah. I think those are all really good tips. I think the biggest thing you hit on, man, is true in a lot of things, is just prioritize. If it's a priority, you will find a way to make it happen. It's just like the person who wants to go on a Western hunt and lives in Pennsylvania and dreamed about going on a Western hunt. It's like the moment you make it a priority to get out west and hunt, you'll get out west and hunt. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I think it's a similar type of thing. There's one thing that I do that I harp on, and I use it to save for hunts. I use it to save for anything that I want that's kind of extraneous, or what my wife would consider extraneous. Maybe I don't. Is this thing called Digit. It's an app, right? It's an app, and it's all done through text messaging. And I have it set up that it runs an algorithm, nerd talk here, runs an algorithm over my bank account for a 12-month cycle. It can tell when I have influxes of money in terms of deposits and outfluxes of money in terms of debits. And it can kind of look at my year and understands how my spending ebbs and flows. So it knows around the holidays it's a little higher. It maybe gets a lot lower in the spring and summer, and then it maybe has a spike in like June or July when you take a vacation. It takes all that into consideration. It knows when all your bills go out because it understands, net money going out versus coming in. And what it basically does is, like, every week it will take a certain amount of money out of my checking account and put it into a savings account that it knows that I won't feel based on my spending habits. And then at the end of so long, you know what I mean? It's like, then all of a sudden it's like you turn around, it's like, man, I got $2,000 sitting there to go do a hunt or whatever. I use that, and then, and I just don't touch it. And then I end up using it for things like taking a hunting trip, or, recently I used it to put new insulation in my house or whatever. It's just kind of like this pool that just continues to grow. And then I check it whenever I'm like, I'd really like to do this, and it's a little bit more money than I usually like to shell out. I check that and see how much I have and can I do it or not. So that's a really easy way. But what you said with a direct deposit is like the foolproof plan, is just take a set of money based on your budget and put it aside. This is kind of my janky way of doing it, because I kind of fool myself into not thinking I have any money, and then I do. So it's a nice, it's couch cushion money, I like to call it. But
And just from a practicality standpoint, and some of the listeners may get a kick out of this, but I mean, if we're talking, real life scenarios here, if you really want, let's say you got to put, you need another $10,000 or $15,000 and you can get there or whatnot. I mean,
right.
Look outside in the driveway or look at the garage. Are you driving a vehicle that's nicer than what you need? If you really want a piece of ground, why not sell that that jacked up rig and get something that's a little more practical that's still going to get you to your new hunting farm.
Right.
This is real world scenarios here. And I'm not telling people to do that, but there's ways to do it. You get creative and you can do it.
Right.
So,
yeah. The last thing that I want to ask in this first part, and I think this is an important part and might be slightly overlooked, is the pros and cons of bringing in I almost said hunting partner. They might be your hunting partner. Pros and cons of bringing in a partner. Let's exclude like our spouses, our better halves, and just consider that my family, my wife and I. She says yes, you can buy a hunting farm, and I'm going. I don't think I can afford it on my own. I should see, and then maybe you or Utah, for example. Utah is like, hey, yeah, let's go in on a farm together. In whatever state. I guess give me a few things that are pros and cons for partnering with someone for people to kind of watch out for, because I don't know that all partners are necessarily created equal in every facet of life per se.
The most important part of a partnership is that you trust each other. Hands down, owning land together, owning any entity, let alone land, a piece of ground that most likely you're both hunting on and you're putting sweat equity into, you're going to be emotionally attached to, that guaranteed will test each other's trust and honesty.
Mm-hmm.
Guaranteed. And that is the most important part of all this. And I'm not trying to scare people away from partnerships at all. There are thousands of phenomenal partnerships and friendships that have grown into brotherhood, sisterhood because of partnerships. So, number one is that you got to align with somebody that has similar goals with what you want to do. Maybe you just want to get one piece of ground and that's because you're tired of losing property that you've been hunting on and you only go out maybe a couple times a year and you can't quite afford that 60 acres. But if you've got somebody else in there and you're content with that and that's all you want for the rest of your life, then as long as they're on the same page, that's going to work out well. On the other hand, you might have guys that are trying to climb the ladder and buy a farm, put a bunch of work into it, turn it around, make a profit, buy a larger chunk of ground, and really climb the ladder. Find that person that's going to align with what your goals are. And the fact is, life always changes. So leading into the next step is you really, both of you have to, or the three of you or however many, go into, speak with an attorney and really discuss how that entity needs to be organized, because two people just going in and getting their names on a deed is a dangerous thing. There's a lot of things in life that happen with death and divorce and income and missed payments and inheritance and you name it, it's something will come up. So having an attorney help you navigate the way to organize that ownership is going to really help you, and that's going to establish a lot of those things I just talked about. That's going to establish ahead of time what happens. What happens if this? What happens if that? What if one person wants to sell their share and move on to the next? Right. So speaking with an attorney, getting somebody that you can trust. Okay, let's talk about the pros and cons. And the biggest pro is that you can acquire more than what you could on your own.
Right.
Utah and I go in together, and instead of both buying 80 acres, we can go in and buy 160. Or maybe he's my sugar daddy, and I can afford 40, and he can afford 120, and we can, however you want to cut it up. But so being able to acquire more than what you could on your own is a huge plus. You also get, again, and if it's Utah, I know this will happen. We're going to get twice the amount of work done. Okay, right. We're going to be able to go in and get twice the amount of projects done. We're going to buy that. By doing so, we're buying time as well. So that can be really advantageous for not only getting a lot accomplished, but if a couple guys are looking to get into that groove of buying and selling, the fact that you've got 4 hands there as opposed to 2 is really beneficial. And then lastly, the intangible benefits. I would say it's a hell of a lot more fun going and planting a food plot and hunting together, as opposed to doing it all on your own and being a loner out there.
I heard that.
So you can really solidify some incredible friendships and like I said, a brotherhood whenever you go in and buy a piece of ground together, and that's awesome. I mean, that is an intangible, huge benefit of having a partner on a piece of ground. But obviously, there's going to be some cons as well. So, like I said, you've got to trust them, and what happens whenever. And I talked about, divorce or death or missed payments or inheritance or whatnot. I mean, you've got to be able to address those situations whenever life confronts you with those. Right. So that's the largest con. It's easier when it's just yourself. You're probably not going to be able to buy as much. Well, you're not going to be able to buy as much ground. You probably won't get as much accomplished. But it's yourself, and you're more simple. You're driving the ship. Right. That's the biggest con, is whenever other people are involved. And it's really not. Speaking with some of these other veterans and the guys I learned from, some of my mentors, I've asked them about this, and they said a lot of times it's really not the partners per se where they're locking horns. It's the other people that are involved in those partners' lives. Right. So that's something that you just have to be willing to take on whenever you get into a partnership.
Nice. I think the biggest takeaway from section number 1 is that Utah might be a sugar daddy. I think that was the big takeaway, and I like how he's
really good chance that he is. And with those pythons of his, he's getting 4 times the amount of work done.
Exactly. Awesome, man. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap this section 1, brother. I appreciate you coming on and doing this, and looking forward to section 2.
Thanks, Clint.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to Ben for coming on the show. Be sure to head over to Whitetail Properties and check out all the land that's available in your area, and start making your plan. Be sure to drop Ben a line on Instagram or Facebook if you have any questions. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer them or point you in the right direction where you might be able to find some answers. I'll, of course, post all the places and ways you can get a hold of Ben in the blog post show notes for this podcast. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We'd be super appreciative if you would do that for us. And before we shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. Wicked Tree Gear, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Trophy Ridge, Ozonics, Obsession Bows, Tecumani Seed, Glacier Coolers, Ramcat Broadheads, and Trophy Taker Rests. And until next time,